Welcome back, and congratulations to those on other continents who could figure out California daylight savings. If you're on, you figured it out. I hope you enjoyed our visit to Lithuania's three main cities last week, but I always think you really only get to know a country by exploring its outlying areas. For me, Lithuania was no exception. I always knew my grandparents had lived in Vilna, but as I started to research my roots, I learned that before Vilna, my grandmother's family had lived in the shtetls of Lintupi and Svencionis, or as my grandmother said, Svencionis. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Jews moved around a lot in Eastern Europe. You are looking at a map of Lithuania's small towns and shtetls. Last week, one person wrote in and said the plural of shtetls is shtetl, and he's right. But the other correct option is shtetls, and that's the one I'm more comfortable saying. So I'm going to continue to use that. I have three arrows on the map, and while we visited other small shtetls, it was all in that general area. So if you connect the arrows, that's about where we were on our tour. One other update, as we discussed, it was at the beginning of the 21st century that there were marked conflicts between members of Chabad, Lubavitch, and secular leaders. I definitely was aware of the undercurrents on both my visits, but I'm not knowledgeable enough to go into any further details in my presentation. Also, I found no evidence of Reform or conservative Jews in Lithuania. Remember to stay muted and hold comments and questions until the end of the presentation. Now, let's begin our journey. When you think of shtetls, you probably envision, as I did, Fiddler on the Roof. But I was surprised in three ways. First, some shtetls were much larger than the tiny town of Anatevka. My maternal grandfather, however, came from a town which he described as so small that if a horse had its nose in the front of the town, at the same time its tail was in the back of the town. My maternal grandmother, though, lived in a much larger shtetl that even included small factories and 5 synagogues. Secondly, the shtetls in Lithuania were in beautiful scenic areas near lakes, rivers, and forests. But the biggest surprise was finding out that in many places, Jews made up a huge part of the population, often 50% and higher. Of course, all that ended with the Holocaust, when up to 95% of Lithuania's Jews were murdered. Today, both Jews and Lithuanians are trying to restore the little that remains of the Jewish culture. Everywhere we met Lithuanians, Christians, who were eager and proud to show us the bits and pieces of what was left of Jewish life in their towns. But before we visit these shtetls, we're going to take a side trip to one of the most touristy places in Lithuania, Trikai. Trikai, an early capital of Lithuania, is a popular lake resort and historic district not far from Vilna. According to legend, after a successful hunting party, Grand Duke Gediminas discovered a beautiful lake. There are about 200 lakes in the region, and he decided to build a castle. Trikai, which means glade, was first mentioned in the Chronicles of the Teutonic Knights in 1337. Trikai's main attraction is its large castle, famous for its Gothic architecture and its special location. It stands on an island in Lake Gelv, one of the deepest lakes in Lithuania. The view of the historic structure is straight out of a fairy tale. You can reach the castle by crossing the long wooden bridge. In the winter, the lake freezes over and becomes a natural skating rink. The construction of the stone castle was begun in the 14th century, completed by Vytautas the Great in 49. Throughout its history, it was destroyed, rebuilt, and expanded many different times. And I find this next part very interesting. In 1961, the restructuring of the upper castle and a high tower were completed. However, the work on the rest of it came to a halt when Nikita Khrushchev declared that rebuilding the castle would be a sign of glorification of Lithuania's feudal past. Finally, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, Lithuanian authorities completed it in the early 1990s. Today, the island castle hosts various cultural events, including operas and concerts. Unlike castles in the UK, Trikai Castle is built of brick. It served as a fortress and a home for the Grand Dukes. We had fun walking up and down stairs and exploring the nooks and crannies. While touring, our guide told us that owning a bed in the Middle Ages was a sign of very high status, and people would brag in their letters that they had slept in a real bed. In 2012, for a few lita, we tried our hand at sharpshooting and archery. Debbie was an amazing shot. You can look at the picture of the bullseye and see where her arrows landed. Today, now that Lithuania is part of the EU, the lita has been replaced by the euro. I tried out a few punishments from the Middle Ages, and after much torture, I was forced to answer the big question: is there a Jewish connection in Trikai? And the answer is yes. Trikai was home to a large Jewish sect called the Karaites. Before I went to Lithuania, I had never heard of them. The Karaites, I think that's the correct pronunciation, first came to Trikai in the 15th century from the Crimea as bodyguards for Duke Vitaminus. The Karaites, literally people of the scripture, denied Jewish oral tradition. In other words, the Talmud and other rabbinic writings. Karaites believed in strict interpretation of the literal text of the Torah. One of the biggest differences between traditional Judaism, called the Rabbinites, and the Karaites is in regard to the Sabbath. The Karaites noted that the Torah specifically prohibits lighting a flame on the Sabbath, so they kept their houses dark. The traditional Jews, on the other hand, relied on rabbinic interpretation that allowed them to leave a burning flame ignited before the Sabbath. Karaites also prohibited sex on the Sabbath, while Rabbinites considered the Sabbath to be the best time to fool around. You can make your own decision. On the left is a Karaite's 18th Karaite. I just found my correct pronunciation. Karaite's 18th century house of worship, still standing in Trikai, called, and this is interesting, the Knesset, from the word Knesset, a meeting place. It is the oldest in Lithuania and one of the 3 oldest Karaite temples in the world still in use. On the right, you can see several old homes, each with 3 windows. According to legend, Karaites used to build their houses, dedicating 1 window to God, a second to Vytautas, the Grand Duke, and the 3rd one for the owner himself. In reality, it was all about money. Windows could only be installed after a tribute was paid to the Duke. Therefore, less wealthy residents had 1 or 2 windows on the street side, and wealthy people could show off with 3. During the 19th century, the Russian authorities told the Karaites that if they could prove they were not responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, they would be freed from the oppressive rules against the Jews. A very clever, very fascinating leader of the Karaites, Abraham Furkovich, traveled to Jerusalem, Aleppo, and Cairo, collecting ancient Jewish documents, doctoring the information and changing the dates to prove that the Karaites were exiled from Israel before the time of Jesus and therefore couldn't have been complicit in his crucifixion. And the Tsar bought this falsehood. Today, the St. Petersburg Library has a large collection of priceless ancient Jewish manuscripts. So are they Jews or not Jews? The Karaites follow the Torah, speak Hebrew, and qualify as Jews for the purposes of immigration to Israel. But just as they hoodwinked the Tsar in the 19th century, they also convinced the Nazis in World War II that they were not Jewish and were consequently saved from the Holocaust. Their history is very complex, and if you're interested, I suggest you Google them to find out more. Trikai was fascinating, and I learned so much, but we were headed to meet traditional Jews in the home of my mishpacha in Svencionis. As we visit the shtetls, I want to point out that almost all of the places in Lithuania have different spellings, even totally different words. In this slide, I have listed 15 variations for what I call Svencionis and my grandmother called Svencionis. Last week, one of my cousins asked why there are variations in spelling of our common ancestral name, Antelep. As you'll learn later, our name was taken from a small town in Lithuania, and with all the possible spellings, that might be the answer. On my first trip to Lithuania, we had the opportunity to visit one outlying town, and I chose Svencionis because my grandmother's family had lived there. It was one of the oldest towns in Lithuania, dating back to the 1300s. Napoleon and his troops stopped there overnight on their way to Moscow. Between the two world wars, there was a large Jewish community, 40% of the population, and Jews were very active in its three main industries: felts, pelts, and herbal pharmaceuticals. Before exploring Svencionis, Debbie and I had planned to take a detour across the border to Belarus to visit the town of Lintupi, only 8 miles away. Remember how close it was. Why? My great-grandparents were born and were married in Lintupi. Before we left home, we had spent at least $200 each and jumped through hoops, filling out tons of paperwork for the Belarus authorities in order to get visas to enter the country. We thought we were all set, but we hadn't figured on the corrupt, bureaucratic government that controls Belarus. When we arrived at the border, just a small barrier across the road, no one was there. Our driver knocked on the door of one of the few buildings in the area and learned that the border crossing was only open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Of course, we were there on a Monday. We found out that another crossing was 40 miles away, so we ran for the border. When we got there, we were delighted to see a young soldier guarding a formal gate. He took our passports and visas and returned with another soldier who had a long talk with our driver. Whether they were speaking Russian, Lithuanian, or Swahili, I couldn't understand a word they said, but I knew there was no way we were getting into Belarus. Evidently, this border is just for people from Belarus or the Svencionis area. The country has only 2 full-time border crossings, and the next one was 180 miles away. Our driver did offer to take us, but we quickly declined. Those in our group who originally went straight to that second border had to wait 5 hours to make the crossing. A few years later, my cousin Richard did get to Lintupi. He took the train. Back in Svencionis, we went to the city hall where we met the woman in charge of cultural heritage. She presented us with a book listing names of Holocaust victims from the area, and we found my grandmother's family name, Matskin. Nearby, we visited a local museum. The downstairs had Neolithic and Paleolithic displays, stuffed animals and birds. Upstairs were artifacts from the 14th century to modern times, including samovars and a huge wooden hope chest. In 2012, as Debbie and I were leaving, the museum guide showed us a picture of a grave of skeletons of Svencionis Jews who had been massacred nearby. This was the first time I was to learn about the mass murder of the area's Jews. I will tell you the rest of the story in my final presentation. At lunch, we were honored to meet the mayor and his wife. On the left is a fascinating man, Moshe Shapiro. He is the chairman of Svencionis Jewish community, which had only about 20 members in 2012 and 10 in 2018. He became our tour guide the following day. When we met him, he kissed our hands and said, Shalom Aleichem. Our interpreter was in the drugstore, so I communicated with him in a bissel Yiddish. He shared his stories for 4 hours with our guide translating. I learned that Litvaks like to talk. Born in 1950, his parents survived the war because his father was in the Russian army and his mother was in Belarus. His father, a decorated military official, was an important man in the community and head of police during Soviet occupation. I surmise that, in other words, he was a good communist. When we participated in writing the new Torah in Vilna, we found out just how important Moshe was. He was given the honor of writing one of the very first letters. He spoke to us in a large park, which had been the site of the Jewish ghetto. Today, nothing remains but 2 memorials. In the freezing cold, we sat on a wooden bench in front of a beautiful wooden menorah, a memorial to the murdered Jews, while Moshe told us about their history. The original menorah had fallen apart. When a delegation of Svencionis survivors from Israel saw it, they were terribly upset. Because the locals couldn't afford to replace it, the Israelis raised the money for a new one. A famous non-Jewish sculptor created it, believing that Jews and non-Jews are brothers. In addition to the menorah, another memorial was placed in memory of a synagogue that once existed in the period between the 2 wars. The Svencionis area consisted of, in the period between the 2 wars, the Svencionis area consisted of over 20 communities where the Jews were very active. Svencionis had 2 7-year schools with Yiddish and Hebrew lectures, a Jewish junior high school, a Jewish cultural and educational association, a library, a theater, a football team, and several Zionist groups. Out of a population of 9,000 in a town, a third were Jewish. After World War II, all the Jews in the area were gone. By the 19th century, much of Jewish life in Svencionis revolved around the shtetls Orthodox synagogues. One synagogue, now referred to by survivors as the Old Synagogue, was a substantial brick structure that could house a large congregation. In addition to the Orthodox Old Synagogue, Svencionis had 2 Hasidic congregations and a synagogue for craftsmen and artisans. It would eventually have a fifth synagogue, referred to as the New Synagogue. When the Nazis invaded, the Jews had to immediately leave their homes and enter the boundaries of the ghetto. Only the rabbi remained in the previous place, in the small prayer house next to the house of study. The ghetto was not fenced in or guarded, yet Jews were not permitted to leave and walk freely through the town, except on market days when they could go out for 2 hours to buy necessities. The ghetto operated from July 1941 to April 1943. At its peak, it housed some 1,500 prisoners. The Jewish cemetery in Svencionis is one of the oldest and biggest Jewish cemeteries in Lithuania, with 400 monuments. It was established in 1414 as Jews settled there during the reign of Vytautas the Great. We entered through an iron gate decorated with Jewish stars. This cemetery is very beautiful with tall green trees and wildflowers. When we were there in 2012, the foliage was overgrown with few discernible paths. All that had changed when we returned in 2018. In 2012, I went from grave to grave, trying to sound out the Hebrew to find a family name. In 2018, in a few minutes, my cousin Roberta found a grave written in Hebrew with our great-grandmother's maiden name, Leah Matskin. We have no idea whether she was one of our relatives or not, but we like to think so. We've been told that all Matskins are related. The Nazis has taken the Jewish gravestones to use as building material. Today, many of them have been rescued to create the memorial you see in this picture. After a scenic drive past forest and lakes, we arrived at another ancestral town, Zurich, where cousin Laurie's grandfather was born. 3 non-Jewish residents are keeping Jewish heritage alive with a website on Jews who lived in the area. They have a Jewish virtual museum online. Before we got there, we thought it was an actual museum, and we brought items to be put on display. A menorah, Seder plate, mezuzah, Yiddish sheet music, and pictures of our relatives. They took us to the site of the old synagogue, pictured in the center. The outside remains the same, but inside has been converted to apartments. In 1890, there were about 3,000 Jews in Zurich, making up 50% of the town's inhabitants. In the 1930s, there were 95 local Jewish craftsmen and 40 out of 50 local shops belonged to Jews. I hope you're absorbing what a large percentage of these towns consisted of Jews. Zurich is surrounded by beautiful lakes. It also has the highest recorded temperature in Lithuania. I can understand why Lithuanians come to Zurich in the summer for vacation. Even the Jewish cemetery in Zurich is on a beautiful plot of land overlooking the water with many intact gravestones. In contrast to Zurich Cemetery with its marked graves, when we drove to Krakiniha killing field, a short distance from the town, all we could see were mounds of mass graves. On August 26, 1941, over 2,500 Jews from the Zurich area were murdered by German officers and members of the Lithuanian activist group. This is important to remember. Lithuanians killed Jews. There were more than 500 Jewish synagogues and prayer houses in Lithuania. And because timber was plentiful, many were built of wood. Though 8 of these wood synagogues still remain today, there is none still in use. At the end of my last presentation, I showed you a picture of a synagogue that we visited in the town of Zozly in 2012. When I returned in 2018, it had changed so much, I didn't believe it was the same building. You can see for yourself. In fact, I kept arguing that it couldn't possibly be the same. I was convinced only when I saw the same caretaker whom I had met in 2012. He is an amazing Lithuanian who, using his own money, has taken care of the synagogue and the nearby graveyard. He spoke to us about what happened to the Jews in the area. I'm going to play a portion of his interview to hear him describe what he does in his own words and to give you a chance to hear the Lithuanian language.
So it was they had very hard conditions to work here, but later on in 1942, on the 28th of August, were taken to the woods over there, he's showing all the time, and they were shot, killed there. So on one side men were shot,
kitoj vietoj vaikai, moterys.
and on the other side children,
1800 sušaudyta moterų ir vaikų.
children and women, 1,800 women and children.
Tai aš tos kapus ten ir prižiūrau, ten yra
So now
paminklas, tai aš
he
tenais
takes
juos
care not only
nuvažiuoju
of this synagogue, but also he takes care of the cemetery. He goes and just from time to time and takes care of the cemetery.
Does the Lithuanian government pay him?
Ar lietuvių vyriausybė jų moka ar ne?
Kas čia mokės? Čia,
Nobody
kad tai čia
pays.
tvarkau, niekas man nemoka.
Even nobody pays.
The EU Cultural Ministry and the county are underwriting the restoration of the synagogue, but they need more outside money to finish the project, which they hope to use as a national museum of Jewish culture. The shtetl of Zozly was located on the main road from Vilna to Kovno, and the Jewish population was important there since the 16th century. In 1889, Zozly's Jewish community numbered about 2,800. Due to economic hardship and a rise in anti-Semitic activity, many Jews immigrated during the interwar years. By 1940, there were only 981 Jews, but they still represented 50% of the population. They worked as tailors, doctors, pharmacists, shoemakers, rabbis, artisans, and teachers. The Germans occupied Zozly on June 27, 1941. On the 16th of August, police arrested 193 Jewish males over the age of 14 and 89 females. They were taken to another town and never returned. Sometime later, all remaining Jews, mostly women, children, and the elderly, were rounded up, locked in the synagogue, and guarded by local police. On the 29th of August, they were removed from the synagogue and taken to the forest and shot. I think the most quintessential shtetl we visited was Zozly. In the middle of the 19th century, approximately 650 Jews resided in Zozly. In 1987, 1,300 out of a population of 2,000 were Jews, almost 2/3 of the population. On the eve of the Soviet annexation of Lithuania in 1940, the Jewish inhabitants of the town made up 80% of the total population, earning a living from commerce, artisanship, and agriculture. I am sharing these details on the number of the Jews not as dry facts, but to emphasize what a large part of the Lithuanian population was Jewish. After the war, no Jews were left in this town too. There are only 3 streets in the whole town. The houses are much the same as they were in the 19th century. The Jewish houses had 2 doors directly on the street, one for a shop and one for the living quarters. The Lithuanian houses had only 1 door with a small porch in front of the house. In the slide on the right, the Jewish house is the larger one in the foreground. While the houses were primarily wooden, one side of each house was a brick wall to protect against the spread of fires. This photo dates to Zozly's 1928 celebration of the 10th anniversary of Lithuania's independence from Tsarist Russia. All the townspeople are pictured, and according to our guide, everyone got along, Jews and non-Jews. Leaders of the town, including the chief administrative officer of the larger municipality, graciously welcomed our group. The townspeople seemed to be fascinated by us, taking our pictures and making videos of our every move. I felt that we were something rare and special. My cousin Shirley expressed it perfectly, saying, quote, "Throughout my whole time in Lithuania, I felt like an extinct species returning to its homeland." According to the 1931 Lithuanian government census, Zozly had 20 businesses, and 100% were owned by Jews. There was even a Jewish woman dentist. Take a minute and look at the chart. We visited what used to be the largest synagogue, now used as a meeting hall, crafts building, and bakery. Cousin Lori, with the blue scarf, gave each of us a songbook, including Yiddish songs, spirituals, and American folk songs. In what used to be the sanctuary of the synagogue, but today is a modern auditorium, we sang a Yiddish lullaby, which fascinated our hosts. I'm sure Yiddish has not been spoken in the town for over 80 years. Somewhere there is a video taken by our hosts as we sang. The next day, the town elder called our cousin Asia, who is on the far left, to wish us Happy New Year. It was Rosh Hashanah, and to tell us we Jews owned the town. Asia is one of the few Jewish tour guides in Lithuania and is an expert, often acting as a spokeswoman for Lithuanian Jewry. We were extremely lucky to have her as our guide. The town is trying to revive the old Lithuanian crafts. We saw a variety on display: weaving, pottery, straw mobiles, wooden toys. A wood-burning oven is used for baking a special bread, and we were lucky enough to be given a sample. My cousin Ella is holding up felt boots, which is a typical craft. What connected all the women on our trip was the name Antelep. Our common ancestors were Avram Benish and Liba Sora Antelep, who were born, we think, in Antelepti, which was the last stop of the day. It was on the outskirts of Antelepte. Jews who usually didn't have inherited surnames until the end of the 18th century took their names from various sources, including occupations, characteristics, or the areas where they had once lived. We feel fairly certain that our unusual name originated with this town. The 1890 census reported that 86% was Jewish. A representative from the town greeted us by the sign and gave us a flyer and poster. We said a shehechianu, a prayer of thanksgiving, because we were thankful that our grandparents came to America and that Ella and Ossi's parents lived under the Soviets and not the Germans during the Holocaust. If not, we probably would have been part of the 95% of the Lithuanian Jews killed in that time. Our children and grandchildren would never have been born. Cousin Lori gave a moving speech thanking our Christian hosts for caring about and preserving the Lithuanian Jewish heritage. Before we leave our visit to the outlying areas, I have to talk about the delicious food we ate in Lithuania. In 2018, our cousins Asa and Ella welcomed us with a typical Litvak meal, and what a feast. Gefilte fish, chopped liver, chicken, beet salad, Lithuanian bread, farmer's cheese with honey. The last time I had eaten such delicious food was when my grandmother was still alive. When I was teaching middle school, teachers were surveyed to find out their favorite foods. The list included hamburger, spaghetti, pizza. I said that my two favorite foods were borscht and blintzes. And in Lithuania, these delicacies were everywhere on every menu. By the way, I found out that in Lithuania, borscht is called summer soup. Some days I literally ate both of them twice a day, and they tasted just like my grandmother used to make. Near Ignalina, a town outside of Svencionis, we ate at a charming restaurant, Romnesa Ignalina. It is known for sakotis, a traditional Lithuanian and Belarusian spit cake made of butter, eggs, flour, sugar, and cream, cooked on a rotating spit in an oven or over an open fire. Even the ceiling was decorated with the cakes. When Debbie and I were in Svencionis, we went for lunch in the only restaurant in town at the time. The menu had two items, pork and latkes. Of course, we went for the latkes. They had a horrible sauce on top and were almost inedible. Definitely not like what my grandmother used to make. Sorrel soup is big in Lithuania, and in one restaurant, it was served in a delicious bread bowl. Not only did we enjoy traditional food, but we had some delicious gourmet meals in lovely restaurants. Our last night with our family in Kovno was Rosh Hashanah. We celebrated at a farewell dinner at one of the best restaurants in town, Hunter's Lodge. At first, I was concerned because I knew it was a restaurant specializing in game, and I don't eat Thumper or Bambi. But it was absolutely delicious. We started with yummy appetizers, cheese, herring, eggplant, olives, and grapes. And one of my favorite Lithuanian dishes, fried bread with cheese, followed by mushroom soup, a turkey entree for me, and apple strudel for dessert. We ate, drank wine, beer, and sparkling water, and reminisced about our unforgettable trip. Before we leave the outlying areas of Lithuania, we're going to go to one more. So outlining, it's in another country. After Klaipeda, we set out for Riga, Latvia. I could spend a whole session on Riga, but in the interest of time, I'll give you just the Jewish highlights. The Jewish history of Riga goes back to the 13th century. Guess what? In the early 14th century, Jews were banned from living in the region. But in 1561, when Poland gained control of the territory, Jews began to settle there. In the 15th and 16th centuries, though, only the most prominent Jews were allowed to live in Riga, but were confined to special inns. Because they were banned from being buried within the city limits, The Jewish dead were taken to cemeteries in Poland until 1725, when permission to build a cemetery finally came. By the mid-18th century, there were still only a couple hundred Jews in Riga, but in the late 18th century, rules restricting Jewish movements in the city were relaxed, and Jewish residents started to appear more and more. Those first Jews were skilled craftsmen, producing the finest shoes, furs, furniture, and intellectuals led the way in finance, medicine, and law. The Jewish community was centered in a ghetto just southeast of Old Town. During World War II, the Nazis destroyed most of the ghetto. Today, little remains of the area's once vibrant Jewish character, except for many derelict wood and brick buildings and a few memorials to the victims of the Holocaust. Before World War II, about 40,000 Jews lived in Riga, representing slightly more than 10% of the city's population. The community had Hebrew and Yiddish schools, a lively Jewish cultural life, and Jews were integrated into most aspects of life in Riga and even sat on the city council. Only about 150 Jews from Riga survived the Holocaust. After Riga was occupied by the Nazis in July 1941, all synagogues of the city were burned down. The Pitov Shul was the only one to escape this fate. Why? Location, location, location. Because the building was located in the old town of Riga, the Nazis feared that the fire could spread to the adjoining buildings, which were made of wood. During the Holocaust, the synagogue building was used as a warehouse. Before the war, during the holidays, the synagogue was crowded. And in addition to Jews, liturgical music lovers of other nationalities came to listen to the synagogue choir under the direction of a famous cantor. When the Second World War was over, the Aron HaKodesh on the eastern wall of the synagogue remained intact, and a Lutheran minister had saved the Torah by hiding it. In Soviet times, it was one of the few functioning synagogues in the Soviet Union and one of the 4 in which choir performances were held. Despite the unspoken prohibition of Jewish religious life and constant supervision by the state security authority, the synagogue remained the heart of the city's Jewish life. In 1997, the state transferred the synagogue to the Riga Jewish religious community, and it once again became the heart of Jewish life in Latvia. In 2007 and 2008, the synagogue building was fully renovated. The building is an example of Art Nouveau, which was very common in Riga at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. The interior is decorated with ornaments featuring the elements of ancient Egyptian and Assyrian Babylonian styles. After the war, thousands of Jews returned to Latvia, including Jews from other parts of the Soviet Empire. By 1989, 23,000 Jews lived in Riga, but many have since immigrated to Israel, Britain, and the United States. Still, Jewish doctors, scientists, engineers, artists, and teachers are making a noticeable impression on the culture of the city. Today, Jews live freely and with the full support of the Latvian government. This is the end of our detour to Riga, Latvia. It is a beautiful modern city with exceptional architecture, and I would highly recommend a visit. I hope you enjoyed our trip to Lithuania with the side trip to Riga and have come to know that Lithuania is a beautiful country of forests and lakes, delicious food, and a fascinating history of which the Jews were a major part. But for you to have a complete picture and understanding of Lithuania's Jewish history, in my final presentation, I must tell you all that I left out: the period under Soviet domination, and of course, the Holocaust. Please don't be scared away by the topic, because even with the incredible tragedy, I will be including memorable stories of courage, unbelievable escapes. You will learn how Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia once again regained their independence. And best of all, you will hear a personal account from my cousin Ella about what it was like to live under the Soviets. It is important for you to learn the rest of the fascinating story of the Litvaks. I will also shed light on how Lithuanians today view both Soviet domination and the Holocaust. I hope you join with me next Sunday at 10 a.m. for what I believe is the most enlightening of my 4 presentations. Thank you. Before I open the discussion up to comments and questions, last week, within the space of 5 minutes, I received information from 2 different people, one in Lithuania, one in San Jose, about a Litvak, a doctor who escaped to the United States before the war. And I don't have his name in front of me. Maybe Ella can help me out. But he was the doctor responsible for inventing the, what do you call it when you get the heart to beat again? Defibrillator. Dan just reminded me. Sybil, do you have his name? Not Sybil, Ella. Ella, do you have his name? Maybe Ella is.
Yes, I do.
Ella, can you tell us a little bit more about him? Because I got your email and opened my mail, and a friend had sent me an article on him, which I thought was very interesting, because last time we talked about famous Litvaks.
Yeah, I can share a New York Times article with you. Just a moment. I will share it to the chat to everybody. Yes, indeed, it was in USA. You know him as Bernard Lowen, and he was the Nobel Prize winner, Peace Nobel Prize winner for his also anti-war activity. He was originally born in a little shtetl in Lithuania, Utena, to a Jewish family, Lats, and he was born like Boruch Lats in 1921. And the family, luckily, they emigrated to the United States when Boruch Lats was a teenager, in his 14 years, maybe old. So he graduated from medical school in the United States, and he was the one who was the inventor of the direct current defibrillator for cardiac resuscitation, and many more inventions he really did. And he passed away on February 16 this year, 2021, aged 99, in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, United States. And the day, February 16, was familiar to him because that's what the day of independence in Lithuania, and much celebrated. And in Soviet times, he once visited Lithuania, and when asked maybe he knows some Lithuanian language, still something he can say. He sang the Lithuanian anthem, which in Soviet times was forbidden, and the KGB agents who were, of course, present in this meeting were just stricken, and that was his memory of Lithuania, of independent Lithuania, and he was still remembering the anthem of independent Lithuania. And from my side, I can say the same. When I met my uncle Saul Goldschmidt, it was the first time that I really had somebody thinking the anthem of independent Lithuania, because all my life I lived under the Soviets. I never had the anthem sung by somebody. And my uncle Saul Goldschmidt, who was a survivor of Dachau, sang it, and it was the first time I had the anthem of independent Lithuania. It was 1991.
Well, thank you, Ella. Thank you. I did not know that about your hearing the anthem, and thank you for filling us in. Anybody have any comments or questions? Judith? Judy?
Yes, me?
Yes, you, Judy.
Okay, Judy, you can call me Judy S.
Okay.
First of all, I want to thank you for just a fabulous presentation, but also for going that extra mile to go visit all these places that even a seasoned traveler would probably miss. What I was wondering though, if let's say we compared Santa Clara County to Lithuania, it would be as though every fourth person was murdered by a neighbor. I find that part so shocking that it leaves me speechless, and it fills me with anger that this happened. But I really appreciate your presentation. It was excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the facts are the facts. You read 95% of Lithuanian Jews were killed. And next time I'm going to talk about how they were killed, not only by the Nazis, but by the Lithuanians. And Lithuanians today deny this, and it's terribly troubling. I'm not going to get into it now because it's really next presentation, but you're absolutely right, and it's awful. But, and I'll say this next time, there were many good Lithuanians and many good Poles living in Lithuania. So I will try to balance it. Terry, you have your hand up.
Hi.
We could be, very possibly. We'll have to explore it offline.
Unbelievable. The amount of research you did. It was fascinating. I'm in tears.
Oh, thank you. Now, Terry, where do you live?
We're in Danville.
Okay. We'll have to talk offline. Yeah. And speaking of that, my daughter has promised me that next week she will set up a Facebook for our group.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, I asked Lois to send me your email stuff to introduce us so we can chat. We have a halfway decent family tree from my side.
Wonderful.
So fill in some gaps. Yeah, thank you so much.
I just want to tell you that supposedly there is a family connection between the Antileps and the Matskins somewhere.
Probably.
So you're probably related to the Antileps too, if you're related to me. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Anybody else have a comment? Question? Rana.
Yes, thank you again for wonderful, wonderful work you do for us.
You're very welcome.
You make me want to ask more questions.
But go ahead. I can't answer them all.
I know. Well, I think you do a good job. Are there Latvians considered Litvaks?
Possibly part of them. I don't, and I'm not 100% sure on this. I don't think all of Latvia was in the Pale of Settlement. I'm going Pale of Settlement. I have to double check, but definitely part of them were. So yes, I'm sure part of the population were Litvaks, but again, I have to double check on it.
And the other thing is, when we were going to discuss the spelling of Antelope, with an O or without an O.
Oh, I put that in. I said that it's very possible that the variations in spelling were because the translations of the names of the towns are spelled differently. That's my guess. If any Antelopes out there have a better answer, let me know. But the variations in spelling are incredible. Think of the word, and I know this isn't Lithuania and doesn't pertain to Litvaks, but think of the word Hanukkah. You can find many, many different variations. And look at the town of what I call Svencionis, many, many different spellings. So my guess is that.
Well, I did talk to, her name is Fern Novak, my grandma's niece. And I remember her being so emphatic about it. She's the one with the two brothers who had that horrible death. I'm not sure if you know about that. If you don't, it's okay. But yeah, my grandma's niece, and she just, whoa. And there are some antelopes who do still use the E. Thank you.
I've seen it both. Yes, I've seen it both with an A and an O. So both are correct.
Yeah, and even my grandma on her ship manifest has the O.
I have to double check my grandmother's manifest. Oh, this is interesting. I won't go into the details. My grandmother didn't come over as an Antelope. It's a long story, but she came over as an Edelberg. Okay, I'm not going to go in.
My grandma got married as an Edelberg, even though her last name was Antelope.
Okay, we'll have to
talk.
We'll have to talk. We'll have to talk. Okay. Anybody else? Questions? Oh, Firma?
Yes. It's Furman. How it ended up that way, I don't know. Anyway.
It came across without the N. I apologize.
Yeah, right. I've been doing genealogy for about 65 years, and I've taught it.
Wow.
I've taught it at high school and senior centers, college level. Anyway, no, I don't have a degree in genealogy, just history. To answer your question about spelling, because this is the first thing I bring up when I start a genealogy class. Remember that your ancestors spelled nothing. Things were spelled for them. When they came to the United States, nobody said, how do you spell your name? It was some Irish guy who decided how the name was spelled, and that's how it ended up. The craziest one is my wife's family, where they came over and asked the wife, what is your husband's name? And she said, Nathan. So the family name, instead of Walensky, ended up being Nathan. So, and all the descendants of this woman now have the last name of Nathan when it really was Walensky. So enough said. So don't worry about spelling, because it was done by somebody else, not by them, or it was how the name was heard versus how it should have been spelled. Because in some cases, the person who was writing it down didn't know the spelling of the name because he didn't know the language. So whatever it sounded like was how it ended up with. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. The other thing is our grandparents, or at least mine, wrote in Yiddish. So if you're translating from one alphabet to another, things are going to be changed. Furman, is that your first name or last name?
That is my last name. My first name is Richard.
Okay, Richard, it doesn't come across on my screen. I'm afraid to do a presentation on genealogy because I'm not an expert. So maybe you can help me out.
I'd be more than happy. I'm one of those weird people who has a email address of my last name. So my email address is ferman@sbcglobal.net.
Great.
If you send me an email, I'd be more than happy to let you know what I can do and what I can't do. And I'm one of the few people who will actually admit what they can't do, which is much more important than telling you what they can do.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much. I was not raised Jewish. I'm Lithuanian American. My family was Protestant Christian and left before the war started. So this has been just a fascinating because, and potentially we'll get into more of this next week, but we were absolutely not educated about a lot of these things growing up in America so it's been really, really fascinating. I just wanted to thank you so much. It's just a completely different, very, very fascinating perspective. And my grandmother was raised in a town that was more than 50% Jewish, and her father was the pastor, a Calvinist pastor in the town, and his really close friend was the local rabbi because they were the most educated guys in town. And they would hang out together. And my grandmother was actually raised, she spoke Yiddish because she had a bunch of Jewish friends. And
Wow.
It pains me that she probably knew what happened to her friends, but didn't know because they literally left as the Soviets were coming in, and then that's it. And then she died, soon after independence. And so I don't think, and a lot of these records weren't released. Anyway, I just want to say thank you. It's been really fascinating. So
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your family story.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Meryl.
Yeah, it was common enough also for people to adopt other names while they were in the old country. We were from Poland, and we were Levine, but that was a dangerous last name to have. And so our family took the name Semnik. And so we were at Semnik in the old country, but when we came back over here, we retook the name Levine. And so I'm not sure if there are Semniks running around still who are related to us or not. That one is spelled a million different ways because it was written with a C, but it's also written with a TS. So yeah, that was another thing that contributed to some of the issues with last names, that people took them and let go of them and so on.
Yes, and it makes genealogy very difficult because you might have one name and you're trying to find out other relatives, and it's really not the original name. So you have to do a lot of searching. A lot of names were changed. Deborah Zimmer, I see a little hand, but not you. Deborah?
Yes, it's me. Meryl, that is a fascinating story because depending on who you talk to and what year it was, my maiden name was Levine, and my relatives either came from Russia or Lithuania, depending on what war was going on. So I'm going to touch base and share this whole presentation with the two people in my family who are the most genealogically adept. My favorite story is that it was the Russian army, and they came to take my grandfather, who was a rabbi, and they said, "Oh, is Yom Tov Lipman Levine here?" And they said, "Oh, sorry, no one by that name." And within a week, the whole family, meaning, let's see, 2 brothers were born here, 7. The parents and 7 children were on a boat to America. And my father was born in and my father was raised in Brooklyn as a Levine.
Yeah, remember we talked about how Jews did a lot to get out of the Tsar's army, and one historian said, no, this is a myth, and a gentleman, David, was with us, David Goldberg, 2 sessions ago, said it's a myth, but all the research I've done, I don't think it's completely a myth. That's my 2 cents. I'm not going to argue with historians, but just talking to so many people who heard it from their grandparents. And one argument was these Jews were afraid that even in America, they would be found out that they left the Tsar's army. I'm not so sure. They're telling their sons and they're telling their grandsons. So I believe it, but that's just me. Okay. Anybody else? Meryl, did you? Oliver, was that you?
Dale.
Gail.
My grandfather came in 1910 from Minsk, which was in Lithuania, and he left to escape the Russian army. and he came to San Francisco, which was a very smart move on his part.
Oh, my family all came to San Francisco too.
He had cousins there, so.
Yeah, my family had connections. My paternal grandmother already had a brother and sisters there. And forgive me, people who live in the other parts of the United States and North America, I am grateful every day that my grandparents came to San Francisco. And you might wonder why. Well, first of all, I love California. But secondly, San Francisco has always been a very liberal community. It really it grew during the gold rush when you had people from all over the world. And Jews were just more accepted and more part of the community in San Francisco. So I'm glad they came there. Okay, well, again, do not decide not to come just because of the topic next week. I really think you will be happy if you do come.
Shirley. Is your name Shirley? Shirley Lee. Yeah.
Yes, that's who I am. My name, by the way, was Lee Ulichnik. My husband's grandfather's name was Lee Ulichnik, and it was not changed at Ellis Island. I have documentation where and how it was changed. When he became a naturalized citizen, and I have a copy of it, they changed Lee Ulichnik to Lee. And I don't think it's his doing, and this is why. The name Lee Ulichnik is written in a beautiful script, which was his, and the name of Lee is absolutely scribbled. So I don't know for a fact, but I'm guessing that he wasn't too thrilled about the change. I don't know for certain. But that's how my name Lee was Lee Ulichnik and how it became Lee. Okay. Once again, I'll see you next Sunday and thank you for tuning in.